They snickered when I walked in wearing my modest thrift store suit. "Small-town girl with big dreams," one whispered. Little did they know I'd built $1 million company from nothing, sold it, and traveled the world. I wasn't there for their job. I was buying their company. My name is Natalia, and I never thought I'd be the one telling this story. Growing up in a tiny town where the biggest dream most people had was moving to the next county over, I always felt like the odd one out. My clothes weren't designer. Most came from thrift stores my mom and I would scour on weekends. But behind my simple appearance was a mind that never stopped working, planning, dreaming of bigger things. They say don't judge a book by its cover, but we all do, don't we? When people look at me, they see someone unremarkable. Average height, average looks, nothing that screams successful businesswoman. I don't drive a flashy car or wear expensive watches. My handbag isn't covered in some famous designer's initials. I still clip coupons and get excited about sale days. Old habits die hard, I guess. But appearances can be deceiving. Behind this unassuming exterior is someone who built a multi-million-dollar company from her kitchen table, someone who's signed contracts worth more than most people's lifetime earnings, someone who's shaken hands with billionaires who had no idea I was about to join their ranks. That day I walked into that interview room, I saw what I've always seen: the quick once-over, the dismissive glances, the barely concealed smirks. I was used to it. What they weren't used to was someone like me, someone who didn't fit their narrow definition of success but had achieved it anyway. They thought I was there to beg for a position. In reality, I was there to decide if their company was worth adding to my portfolio. The moment when they realized who I really was, that's a moment I'll treasure forever. So if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or laughed at, stay with me. This story is for you. Let me show you how this small-town girl with a big dream didn't just enter the room, she ended up owning it. Because sometimes the underdog doesn't just bark, she becomes the boss. I wasn't born with a silver spoon, more like a plastic one from the local diner where my mom worked double shifts. Our small town in Pennsylvania had more churches than opportunities, and dreams were considered luxuries we couldn't afford. But my mom always told me, "Natalia, your circumstances don't define your potential." Those words became my mantra. After high school, I moved to the city with exactly $237 in my account and a suitcase full of ambition. My first apartment was the size of a closet, with a mattress on the floor and a hot plate that sparked whenever I used it. During the day, I worked as an administrative assistant at a financial firm, and at night, I took online classes in business and marketing. Sleep became optional. Success became essential. The rejection letters piled up. 3 promotions passed me over. "Not enough experience," they said. What they meant was I didn't fit their image. I wasn't polished enough, didn't have the right connections or the prestigious degree. Each no felt like a brick wall, but I kept running into them until the walls started to crack. Then I met Michael. Not at some fancy networking event, but at a 24-hour laundromat at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. He was reading a book on entrepreneurship while waiting for his clothes, and I was reviewing business plans between cycles. Our conversation lasted until sunrise. Unlike others, Michael didn't see my humble background as a limitation. He saw it as my superpower. "You understand value in ways privileged people never will," he told me. With every setback at work, Michael became my sounding board. "Maybe this isn't your path," he suggested one evening as I cried over another rejection. "Maybe you're not meant to climb someone else's ladder. Maybe you're meant to build your own." His words shifted something fundamental inside me. I wasn't failing at their game. I was playing the wrong game entirely. That night, surrounded by takeout containers and crumpled tissues, I drafted the business plan that would change everything. Not knowing it then, I had just written the first chapter of my real story. Michael believed in me before I fully believed in myself. Our first date wasn't fancy, just coffee at a corner shop where he surprised me with wildflowers he'd picked from a community garden. "Roses are predictable," he said with that crooked smile I'd come to love. "These fought through concrete cracks to bloom, reminded me of you." As my business idea took shape, a platform connecting small, overlooked vendors with larger markets, Michael became my unofficial partner. During the day, I'd research competitors and make cold calls from my cubicle when my boss wasn't looking. At night, Michael would bring dinner to my apartment, and we'd brainstorm until midnight. Sometimes he'd fall asleep on my couch while I kept working, and I'd find sticky notes with encouraging messages in my purse the next morning. Our relationship bloomed alongside my business plan. The night I landed my first investor meeting, Michael cooked dinner at my place, burned it completely actually, and we ended up ordering pizza and dancing to 80s music in my tiny living room. When I was so nervous before the meeting that I couldn't sleep, he stayed on the phone all night, talking about nothing and everything until my anxiety subsided. The investor said no, so did the next 5. Michael wiped away my tears and helped me revise my pitch each time. "They're not rejecting you," he insisted. "They're just not visionary enough to see what you see." When I finally secured my first small investment, Michael showed up at my apartment with a bottle of champagne and a handmade card that read, "To the first of many victories." We stayed up all night planning the business launch, his enthusiasm matching mine every step of the way. Our love wasn't separate from my professional journey. It was intertwined with it. Every business milestone was celebrated with a kiss, every setback soothed with an embrace. Michael never competed with my dreams. He helped me nurture them. Together we built not just a relationship, but a foundation for everything that was to come. The day my business officially launched, I was terrified. Our website crashed 3 times from unexpected traffic, and I spent 14 hours straight troubleshooting problems. Michael brought me coffee, made calls to our emergency tech support, and handled customer emails when my eyes were too tired to focus. When the dust settled and we'd somehow survived our first day with actual profit, he whispered, "I'm taking you away this weekend. No excuses." That first vacation was nothing glamorous, just a small cabin by a lake 3 hours from the city. But it was perfect. For 2 days, we disconnected from everything. We hiked trails where the tallest trees made my business problems seem small. We talked about childhood dreams over campfire s'mores. Under stars brighter than any city lights, Michael kissed me and said he'd never met anyone braver. I realized then that success meant nothing without someone to share it with. Back in reality, the business grew faster than I could have imagined. Within 18 months, we were serving clients in 3 states. Michael's marketing background proved invaluable. He never officially worked for my company but spent countless evenings helping me refine strategies. "Your success is my success," he'd say whenever I tried to compensate him. On our 2-year anniversary, Michael took me to the beach. As the sun was setting, I noticed a trail of rose petals leading toward the water. At the end of the path, surrounded by candles, he knelt on one knee. "You've built an empire from nothing," he said, voice shaking. "Would you build a life with me, too?" The ring was modest, all he could afford, but represented everything I valued. Substance over flash, commitment over show. Planning our wedding while scaling the business taught me about balance, something I'd never mastered before. Michael insisted some evenings be work-free, creating space for cake tastings and venue tours amid investor meetings. We were married in a small ceremony, and instead of an expensive honeymoon, we road-tripped across the country, visiting small businesses that used our platform. In a tiny handmade jewelry shop in Arizona, watching the owner's pride as she showed us her workshop, the idea for my second business venture sparked, an incubator program for artisans from underprivileged backgrounds. Both my company and our marriage flourished because of the same principles: authenticity, resilience, and unwavering support. 5 years into building my company, I received the email that changed everything, an acquisition offer from a major corporation. The figure had so many zeros my brain couldn't process it at first. Michael found me sitting in stunned silence at our kitchen table, the laptop screen still open to the message. "They want to buy the company," I whispered, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "All of it." For weeks, we debated the decision. The company had become my identity. These weren't just clients and employees. They were people who'd believed in me when no one else would. Michael never pushed either way, just asked questions that helped me find clarity. If money wasn't a factor, what would feel right? He'd ask as we lay in bed staring at the ceiling. What would give you peace 10 years from now? The night I decided to sell, we sat on our apartment balcony with glasses of wine. I built this to prove I could, I admitted. But maybe the next chapter isn't about proving anything. Maybe it's about experiencing everything. The day I signed the papers, I felt both lighter and heavier. Michael suggested we take a year off, travel the world, gain perspective, find inspiration. We've been running so long, he said, holding my hands across our kitchen table. Let's remember how to walk. Our travels became a tapestry of romantic moments threaded through 12 countries. In Greece, Michael surprised me with a sunset cruise where we slow danced under Mediterranean stars. In Japan, we wrote wishes on paper lanterns and released them into the night sky, his wish being whispered into my ear, that you'll always know how extraordinary you are. In Italy, a gondolier serenaded us as we floated through Venetian canals, Michael's arms wrapped around me as I leaned back against his chest. Between the romance were moments of profound reflection. In a small Moroccan cafe, watching local businesswomen navigate their daily challenges, I realized my work wasn't finished. On a New Zealand hilltop, as Michael took photos of the landscape, the vision for my next venture crystallized. Not just another business, but a way to transform how companies valued talent from unconventional backgrounds. I'm ready to go back, I told Michael, as we watched the northern lights dance across an Icelandic sky. His knowing smile told me he'd been waiting for those words. The business world has no idea what's about to hit it, he replied, kissing my forehead as the green lights pulsed above us like a cosmic endorsement. I chose my outfit carefully that morning, a simple, well-made pantsuit from a sustainable brand with modest accessories, nothing flashy or attention-grabbing. Michael watched me from our bed, curious about my understated choice for such an important meeting. "Aren't you meeting with Harrington Industries today?" he asked, knowing this was one of the largest firms in the industry. "Exactly," I smiled, fastening my mother's old watch, the only valuable thing she'd ever owned. "I want them to see me, not my clothes." Michael came behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and kissing my shoulder. "Good luck," he whispered, "though you've never needed it." Walking into Harrington Industries' gleaming skyscraper, I blended in with the administrative staff rather than the executives. The receptionist gave me a once-over and pointed to the waiting area without the deferential smile I'd seen her give the man in the expensive suit who arrived before me. When the assistant came to escort me to the boardroom, her expression contained poorly disguised surprise. "You're Ms. Petrova?" she confirmed, checking her tablet again. I simply nodded and followed her through the glass corridors. The boardroom fell silent as I entered. 6 executives, 5 men and 1 woman, all in tailored designer suits, paused their conversation to stare. I caught the sidelong glances, the raised eyebrows, the barely concealed smirks. One man leaned to whisper something to another who chuckled under his breath. "Good morning," I said confidently, extending my hand to the CEO, Richard Harrington himself. His handshake was brief, dismissive. "We were expecting someone different," he said, gesturing to a chair at the far end of the table, not the empty seat beside him where guests of importance were typically placed. "I imagine you were," I replied evenly, taking my assigned seat. The presentation began with elaborate slides showcasing their company achievements. Every now and then, they'd ask a patronizing question, "Is our growth model clear enough for you?" Or, "Should we explain the market penetration strategy in simpler terms?" When they finally asked for my resume, passing it around the table with barely concealed indifference, I watched their expressions transform. Confusion first, then disbelief, followed by the slow dawn of horrified recognition. The whispers stopped, the smirks vanished, the atmosphere shifted from condescension to panic in the span of heartbeats. Richard Harrington, whose complexion had turned ashen, cleared his throat. "Ms. Petrova, there seems to be some confusion about the nature of this meeting." I smiled, finally unzipping my portfolio. No confusion at all. Shall we discuss the terms of my potential acquisition of Harrington Industries now? The silence in that boardroom was so complete you could hear the subtle hum of the air conditioning. Richard Harrington's mouth opened and closed twice before he managed to speak. You're that Natalia Petrova, the founder of ConnectVerse? His voice had risen an octave. I nodded, enjoying, perhaps a bit too much, how their expressions had transformed from dismissive to dumbfounded. The woman executive was frantically scrolling through her phone, undoubtedly confirming my identity. But the meeting invitation, stammered one of the men who had been whispering earlier, it just said, potential investor meeting. I prefer to assess companies authentically, I explained, keeping my voice gentle but firm. When people know who I am beforehand, they put on a performance. Today you all showed me exactly who you are when you think nobody important is watching. The desperate backpedaling began immediately. Richard launched into effusive apologies, claiming it was just a misunderstanding, and how they greatly admired my work. The woman executive, who had remained silent during their earlier mockery, suddenly became my biggest champion, highlighting how she'd followed my career with great interest. Your acquisition proposal, Richard redirected, straightening his tie nervously. We weren't prepared to discuss that today. Perhaps we could reschedule when we've had time to... I'm prepared, I interrupted softly, sliding 6 identical folders across the table. Everything you need to know about my offer is in there, including my assessment of your company's current market value and future potential. Their faces fell further as they opened the folders, noting that my valuation was significantly lower than their public market cap suggested. The numbers didn't lie. Their innovation had stagnated, their culture had grown toxic, and their market share was vulnerable. This can't be right, one executive protested weakly. Page 12 explains my methodology, I replied, including employee satisfaction metrics from confidential surveys and innovation decline rates over the past 3 years. Richard's face flushed with anger before he remembered who he was speaking to, someone who could potentially control his professional future. The realization seemed to physically deflate him. I'd like a moment to speak with Ms. Petrova alone, he announced to his team. As they filed out, throwing anxious glances over their shoulders, I remained seated, remembering all the rooms I'd been forced to leave throughout my career while important decisions were made without me. When we were alone, Richard leaned forward. Name your price, he said, his voice a mixture of desperation and resignation. Whatever figure you have in mind, we can negotiate. I smiled, thinking of Michael's words that morning. Mr. Harrington, this meeting was never about money. The boardroom dynamics had completely reversed. Now I was the one leaning back comfortably, while Richard Harrington perched anxiously on the edge of his seat. The other executives, called back in after our private conversation, couldn't seem to decide whether to look at their CEO or at me. Let's start with your company culture, I said, flipping open my notebook. Your employee turnover rate is 47% higher than industry average. Why is that? Stunned silence followed. They glanced at each other, clearly unprepared for specific questions rather than generic acquisition talk. Market pressures, Richard finally offered weakly. The competitive nature of our industry often leads to... Your competitors maintain significantly lower turnover rates under identical market conditions, I interrupted gently, sliding a comparison chart across the table. Let's try again. Why do people leave Harrington Industries? The woman executive, whose name badge read Patricia, cleared her throat. Our performance metrics are aggressive, she admitted, perhaps unrealistically so for many departments. I nodded encouragingly. And what happens when people fail to meet these metrics? The room grew uncomfortable. No one spoke until a younger executive at the far end said quietly, public criticism, sometimes humiliation. Accountability, Richard corrected sharply, shooting the young man a warning glance. Leadership styles differ, I acknowledged, but culture flows from the top. What kind of leader would you say you are, Mr. Harrington? His practiced smile returned. I believe in excellence and pushing people to achieve their best. Sometimes that requires a firm hand. I made a note. Interesting choice of words. Now, I'd like to discuss your product development pipeline. Your last truly innovative product launched 3 years ago. Everything since has been incremental improvements or responses to competitor innovations. Why has originality stalled? The questions continued for nearly 2 hours. With each query, their desperation to impress me grew. The same executives who had dismissed me were now falling over themselves to appear thoughtful, innovative, and aligned with values they assumed I held. Richard kept trying to steer the conversation back to acquisition numbers, while I persistently returned to questions about people, processes, and purpose. By the meeting's end, ties had been loosened. Perfect hair had been nervously ruffled, and the power hierarchy had been completely inverted. As I packed my notes, Richard made one final attempt. "Ms. Petrova, we haven't discussed your offer. We're very interested in—" "I haven't made one yet," I corrected him. "Today was just research." "But your folders," Patricia interjected. "The acquisition proposal was a scenario, not a commitment," I clarified. "I'll be in touch within the week with my decision." As I stood to leave, Richard escorted me personally to the elevator, the same man who had barely acknowledged my entrance hours earlier. "Whatever concerns you have about our company," he said urgently as the elevator doors opened, "I assure you we can address them." I stepped into the elevator and turned to face him. "That's exactly what I needed to determine today, Mr. Harrington, whether you can change or whether change needs to happen without you." The doors closed on his stricken expression, and I finally allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. 3 months later, I stood in that same boardroom, but everything was different. The polished table was now surrounded by a diverse group of executives, some from the original team who had proven adaptable, others new faces I'd brought in from unexpected backgrounds. Richard Harrington was notably absent. He'd chosen a generous retirement package over adapting to the new leadership structure. My acquisition of Harrington Industries had sent shockwaves through the business world. Headlines ranged from "Unknown Entrepreneur Stages Corporate Coup" to "David Takes Over Goliath, the Natalia Petrova story." The business channels couldn't get enough of the woman who showed up in a simple suit and left owning the company. That evening, Michael waited for me at home with my favorite meal and a bottle of champagne. As I kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto our couch, he handed me a glass and sat beside me, his arm pulling me close. "To the boss," he toasted with a proud smile. "To us," I corrected, clinking my glass against his. "None of this would exist without you believing in me first." Later that night, with soft music playing in the background, we slow danced in our living room just like we had after my first small victory years ago. As Michael twirled me under his arm, I thought about how far we'd come from that laundromat meeting. "You know what's funny?" I said as we swayed together. "Those executives probably still don't understand what happened." "What do you mean?" Michael asked, his cheek resting against my hair. "They think I bought their company because it was a good business move, but that wasn't it at all." I pulled back to look at him. "I bought it because of Jenny, their receptionist who looked terrified when her boss walked by. Because of Mark in accounting, who mentioned he hadn't seen his kids awake in weeks due to their demands. I bought it because companies should build people up, not break them down." The transformation wasn't just about business metrics. Within weeks, we had implemented flexible working hours, eliminated the culture of public criticism, and created pathways for administrative and support staff to advance into leadership roles. The woman who had been getting Richard coffee for 7 years was now heading our innovative employee development program. That weekend, Michael surprised me with a romantic cabin getaway, an echo of our first vacation years ago. Under a canopy of stars, wrapped in blankets on the porch swing, he held me close. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. "Not successful. I know you're that. But happy?" I thought about the question carefully. "I'm happy because success on my terms means changing things that matter, and I'm happiest because through all of it, we still have this," I said, lacing my fingers through his. The company was transforming, but more importantly, it was becoming proof that compassion and success weren't mutually exclusive. that sometimes the most revolutionary business move is simply being human. Today, as I look out from my office window at the city skyline, I can't help but marvel at the journey. The company that once laughed at me now bears my vision in every department, every policy, every product. But the true victory isn't measured in profit margins or market share. It's in the culture we've created, where no one gets dismissed based on appearances or background. Last week, I interviewed candidates for our executive training program. One young woman arrived in a carefully mended suit that reminded me painfully of my own early days. When an HR manager started to subtly steer her toward an administrative role instead, I stepped in personally. By the end of our conversation, she had a spot in our leadership pipeline. I saw in her eyes the same fire that had fueled me, the determination to prove everyone wrong. Michael and I celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary last month with a trip to the countryside where he grew up. Away from boardrooms and business calls, we reconnected with what matters most. Under a willow tree by a stream, he gave me a handmade bracelet of wildflowers. "To remind you where we started," he whispered as he tied it around my wrist. That night, watching fireflies from the porch of our rented cottage, I realized that success without love would have been the hollowest of victories. People often ask me for the secret to my success. They expect stories about relentless work ethic or brilliant strategy, which were certainly part of it. But the real secret was much simpler. I refused to become the people who had rejected me. Instead of hardening my heart after being laughed at and dismissed, I promised myself I would create spaces where that never happened to anyone else. My story isn't special because I acquired a company or built wealth. It's special because it proves that kindness isn't weakness, that authenticity isn't a liability, and that the very things the business world might mock you for can become your greatest strengths. So if you're watching this, perhaps feeling overlooked or underestimated, know that those who laugh today may answer to you tomorrow. But when that day comes, choose compassion over revenge. Choose to transform rather than triumph. Your worth isn't defined by others' perceptions, and your potential isn't limited by their imagination. Remember, the world needs more leaders who know what it feels like to be the underdog. Your story isn't just beginning, it's about to change everything.